Hello, welcome to Straight Painting. I'm your host Zach, and I'm officially inviting you on my journey of learning to paint using Magic the Gathering cards. Together, let's learn from my mistakes. Alright, on this week's episode, I'm going to attempt to make a custom full art borderless land for my Tachova deck. I'm drawing inspiration from the work of Canadian artist Monica Morrill, whose work I was introduced to by the Canadian Paintings Twitter account a few weeks ago. I'll leave links below if you'd like to follow either account and learn more about either Monica's art or Canadian art in general. Before we head down to the workstation and start today's project, I wanted to take a moment to discuss Monica's art and the elements within it that I think would translate very well to a Magic the Gathering card. To start with, Monica is a self-taught artist from Vancouver Island, British Columbia. She works in acrylic paint on canvas. Her work aspires to capture a sense of peace and tranquility and to emphasize the supernatural aspects of the world around us that are sometimes overlooked. And what could be more Magic the Gathering than that? To start with, she uses very strong, saturated, complementary colors in her paintings, which cause them to pop off the canvas at you. She also tends to use these undulating sort of movements in the sky that really highlight a sense of movement and a sense of mysticism in the world around you, which is that supernatural element. In the previous piece, Under the Sky, she's using the green to represent northern lights dancing above you at night. And in this piece, she's using oranges and yellows to show rays of sun as they poke through the clouds just before sunset. Now, in this piece, Orange Sky, which is the first piece of hers that I saw and what initially drew me to her as an artist, you get both of those elements in a slightly toned down way. There is the high contrast between the orange and the blue here. There's the sense of movement in the sky as the different values of blue and orange undulate across the sky above you, causing that sense of movement. But overall, there's this sense of peace and calm. It's like you're sitting at a dock in the summer, just watching the sun go down over the lake. And this is the piece that I want to try to approximate in our project today. So if you're ready, join me down at the workstation. Welcome back to the workstation. Before we begin today's project, let's just do a quick run through of all the supplies that we have to help keep our space clean and to make sure that we have everything we need right here to go. First off, we've got some computer paper underneath the card, which will help keep unwanted paint off of our desk surface as we're painting, and it'll make cleanup a lot easier. Secondly, we've got some paper towel off to the side here, which will allow us to dry our brushes off as we go. We've also got a piece of cardstock here. I've learned from watching some other altar videos that taping the card to a piece of cardstock will not only help me to maneuver it without getting my hands dirty while touching it, but it'll also just add an extra layer of surface protection so that we don't get more paint on the actual desk surface. So we've got cardstock and some tape there as well, which will allow us to put the card onto it and keep it there. We've also got our handy dandy toothpick, which will help us when we're cleaning up any of our edge work as we go along on the card. We have a selection of brushes. I'm going to be using a Filbert, this round tip one, as my main brush today. And then I've got some smaller sort of detail brushes to help me pick out some line work as we go along. And we have our palette here off to the side, as well as our water is just off screen. Finally, today's palette will consist of our same three colors as always, which will be black, burnt sienna, and titanium white. Now today's project being a little special, we're going to use some ultramarine blue, which we're going to mix with the white to get the other shades of color that we want. And I've picked out this vermilion, which is orange, to work as the other color, and we will also use white to dilute that and make it into the other shades that we want. So now that we've got everything set up, let's paint. All right. Well, we've now got 2 completed cards for this project, and let's just compare them and see how we felt about it. So on the right-hand side is the card we just painted, and on the left-hand side is the card that I had painted as a practice piece off camera. The first takeaway I have is the color vibrancy between the two of them. The one on the right is a lot brighter. It turned out a lot better. And the main reason for that is I used a white base and I worked my way from the lightest shade of the color value on top of that white as a secondary base to the darkest shade, which is the actual paint straight from the tube, not diluted, not mixed with any other colors, to use as my darkest shade. On the left-hand side, we used a dark gray base, followed by adding a mixture of burnt sienna and black to the color straight from the tube to get this darkest shade. And then we applied that to the entire section where that color would go, and then tried to lighten the color straight from the tube to create these other gradations of that color. And as you can see, it just looks very muddy. It looks very flat. It doesn't look as vibrant or as well defined as the one on the right. The main reason for that being just a darker base followed by the darkest color, and then putting the lighter colors on top of that causes this separation. Whereas you can see on the right-hand side, in the video itself, we worked from the lightest shade up to the darkest, which meant that whenever we put down a new line to create the next darker shade, it allowed us to
really get that to be as clean as possible and to really emphasize that contrast between those two shades. So that's the first takeaway. The second takeaway is the detailing. The card on the right hand side, I feel some of the details were really good, and the card on the left hand side, some of the details were really good, and I'll point those out to you. So on the right hand side here, the actual undulations in each layer of the sky turned out a lot better, and that's because I made the conscious decision to actually use the brush to create these dips and rises as I went through. And that captures more of the movement that you find in Monica's work itself. Whereas on the left-hand side, I just went straight, added, occasional bends and curves, but mostly kept the layers to be straight, and that just didn't capture that feeling. The second thing is the left-hand side, I much prefer the reflection to the right-hand side. And the main reason for that is that I used a flat brush to create the lines that represent the tops of the trees being reflected in the water here, versus on the right-hand side where you saw me using the straight brush to do that. Using the straight brush caused them to turn out very blobbish and very not clean looking. Now, you could argue that that does kind of capture what a reflection does in water. However, it doesn't capture what Monica's work actually looks like. And so that is something that I'll have to keep in mind going forward, is always use a flat brush for those reflection sections. The last takeaway that I have from this is to be less aggressive while cleaning the card face itself. So both of these, in between putting down each layer, I would clean up the title bar to remove any paint that had gotten on it, and that helped to keep it a little bit cleaner overall. However, in this top corner, I ended up actually damaging the card itself because I was applying too much pressure as I was cleaning it. And that led to the actual white surface of the card showing up through there. Now, since this is just a painting for me, I'm happy with that. I can live with that. However, that's just something you want to keep in mind, is don't apply too much pressure while cleaning the actual card itself. So to recap all of that, the first thing is to get more vibrancy, work from a light base and then apply your lightest shade and work your way to your darkest shade. For good detailing, make sure that you make a conscious choice to move your brush to get the shape that you want for each color section, and don't be afraid to use the correct brush for whatever detailing work you're trying to do. Finally, the last takeaway would be that you should make sure to not apply too much pressure while cleaning the card because you could end up damaging it. But overall, I'm happy with how these turned out, and I'm excited to run them in my decks. The final takeaway that I have is to always remember the effort you put in is more important than the perfection you achieve. Now, that's a fancy way of saying that the more you try, the better you'll get. You just have to try. I want to thank you for joining me on this week's episode. I had a lot of fun learning how to approximate Monica's style on a Magic the Gathering card, and I hope that you've learned something through this process too. I'm now ready to sleeve this card up and run it in my Tattoo deck, and I hope that you're ready to join me again in 2 weeks' time for a new card painting project. Until then, peace.